Hello everybody and welcome back to another EDH gameplay here on this channel. Before we get into it, I want to make a quick shout out to Kaiju Cards in Trier, Germany for providing a great place for us where we can meet to play our TCGs. Today we are rocking the Lost Cavern of Ixalan Precons, so I'm on Clavileño Vampire Tribal. Christopher has been excited for weeks to play Admiral Brass Unsinkable Pirate Tribal. Timon is playing Pantlaza Sun Favored as Dino Tribal. And Martin is playing Hakbal Merfolk Tribal. So I'd say let's jump right into the gameplay. Timon starts us off with playing a Path of Ancestry and passing the turn. Martin draws and plays a forest as land for turn.
He passes and I go to my turn.
Play a swamp as my land for turn and use the black mana to cast a Master of Dark Rites. Christopher draws for his turn. Plays an island as land for turn and passes. Timon draws. He plays a Thriving Grove and names Mountain as additional color. He passes his turn. Martin plays an island as land for turn and plays an Arcane Signet. He passes the turn. I untap, draw. I play another swamp. And I use 2 mana to cast a Dusk Legion Sergeant. I move to combat and I attack Martin for 1 with my Master of the Dark Rites. He takes 1 and I pass the turn.
End of turn, Christopher flashes in a Spectral Sailor.
He untaps and draws, plays an Evolving Wilds as land for turn. He moves to combat and attacks me for 1. I take it. And he passes the turn. Timon untaps, draws. He plays a Plains as land for turn and passes the turn. Martin untaps. Taps 3 mana to cast a Kodama's Reach. He finds an island to the battlefield tapped, a forest to his hand, which he immediately plays as his land for turn, and then he passes the turn. I untap. Draw for my turn. I play another swamp as my land for turn. I tap 3 mana and I use the Master of the Dark Rites ability, sacrificing my Dusk Legion Sergeant for additional 3 mana to cast a Patron of the Vein. When it enters the battlefield, I target the Spectral Sailor of Christopher. It gets destroyed, exiled, and I put +1/+1 counters on each of my vampire. End of turn, Christopher cracks his Evolving Wilds for a mountain. He untaps, draws, plays a command tower as land for turn, and passes the turn. End of turn, Timon Path to Exiles my patron, so I find the plains to the battlefield. He untaps, plays a forest as land for turn, and passes the turn. Martin untaps, draws for his turn. He plays an island as land for turn. He taps 3 mana to cast
a Realm Walker.
He chooses Merfolk as it enters, and he constantly looks at his top card now, but I won't always mention it. He also casts a Farsa, God of the Sea, and passes the turn. I untap, draw for my turn. I pay 2 mana to cast an Arcane Signet, and I tap 3 mana to cast my commander. I attempt to move to combat, but before that Christopher Chaos Warps my commander. I put it back into the command zone, and I reveal a Vault of the Archangel. Then I move to combat and I attack Christopher for 2. Christopher goes to his turn, untaps, draws for his turn. He plays a Secluded Courtyard as land for turn, naming Pirates. He taps 2 mana for an Arcane Signet. He taps an additional 3 to cast Captain Lannery Storm. He moves to combat and attacks Timon with her. On attack, she creates a treasure token. Timon takes the 2. Timon goes to his turn, plays a Keswick Wolf Run as land for turn and taps 5 mana to cast Pantlaza Sun Favored. He discovers on ETB and he immediately hits into a Raging Regisaur. He passes the turn and Martin untaps. As I've mentioned, he scries a lot and he looks pretty often at the top of his deck. He plays a Wineglimmer Snarl as land for turn, tapped. For 2 mana he casts a Merfolk Skydiver, putting a counter on his Realmwalker. He taps 3 mana to cast a Topography Tracker. He creates a map token on ETB. He attacks me with his Realmwalker for 3 damage. He passes the turn, so I untap, draw for my turn, and I tap 5 mana to recast my commander. I move to combat, and I attack Christopher with my Master of the Dark Rites. On attack I get the Clavileño trigger. Christopher takes 2, and I pass the turn. He untaps, draws for his turn, plays an island as land for turn, he taps 3 mana to cast a Corsair Captain. On ETB he creates another treasure token and now he also has an Anthem effect. Captain Lannery Storm attacks me, and on attack he creates a treasure token. I take 3 damage and Christopher passes the turn. Timon untaps, draws for his turn, Timon plays a Temple of the False God as land for turn. He taps a bunch of mana to cast Etali, Primal Storm. On ETB he discovers 6. And so he hits a Raging Sawtooth. On ETB it deals 1 damage to each other creature. That kills his Merfolk Skulldiver. He moves to attack, adjusts a little bit, and his Raging Regisaur deals 1 damage to the Topographer, which kills it. Martin takes 4 commander damage from Pantlaza and Christopher takes another 4 from the Raging Regisaur. Timon passes the turn and Martin untaps, draws for his turn. Martin casts a Nikansil, Current Conductor, for 2 mana. Afterwards he pays 4 mana to cast his commander Hakbal, and there will be a bunch of explore triggers at the beginning of his combat. Martin cracks his map token to let Nikansil explore, and due to its triggers it gets 2 +1/+1 counters. He moves to combat and we will just summarize what he ended up with, so you can see that he gained a lot of +1/+1 counters. In his end step I cast Village Rites, sacrificing my Master of the Dark Rites. This will give me a 4/3 Flying Vampire Demon token, and due to the trigger I also draw a total of 3 cards. I go to my turn, I untap and draw. I use my creatures to convoke for a total of 8 mana to cast Order of Sacred Dusk. Afterwards I move to combat and I attack Timon, so I get a total of 3 Exalted triggers, which makes my Order of the Dusk an 8/8. And I also get a Clav trigger, so Timon loses 8 life and I gain 8 life. I pass the turn,
and Christopher untaps. He draws for his turn. Christopher taps 4 mana to cast the Grim Captain's Locker. He uses it right away to surveil 1. He puts an Azure Fleet Admiral into his graveyard and plays a Garroid Sanitarium as land for turn. He taps 2 mana and sacrifices 3 treasures to cast his commander Admiral Brass Unsinkable. On ETB he mills 4 cards. And yes, he didn't hit any creatures. He moves to combat and gets another Admiral Brass trigger and brings back the Azure Fleet Admiral, so on ETB he becomes the Monarch. He moves to combat and attacks me with Captain Lannery Storm. Due to his treasure sacrifices, she is a total of 6/3 and I take the damage. He passes a turn, Timon untaps, draws for his turn. He plays an Arch of Oraska as land for turn, which makes him ascend. He immediately moves to combat and attacks me with Itali, and the Raging Sawtooth goes to Christopher. On attack, Itali hits a few cards. He casts my Crossway Troublemakers and his own Kinjali Sunwing, so all of our creatures enter the battlefield tapped now. I take the 6 damage from Itali, and Christopher blocks with his Captain. We forgot his Discover trigger, and so he gets a Sunfrill Imitator out of it. Christopher's Captain dies and he still takes 3 damage from Trample, which makes Timon the Monarch. For 3 mana he casts a Progenitor's Icon. For an additional 3 mana he casts Whiter, Trainer Prodigy, and he passes the turn. Martin untaps. He taps 2 mana to cast a Stony Brook Banneret from the top of his library, so all of his Malforks have Island Walk and costs less to cast. He also casts a Search Spanner for 3 mana. Afterwards he moves to combat, and due to one of his Explore triggers he's able to put a Simic Growth Chamber onto the battlefield due to Nikanzil's ability. He makes Nikanzil unblockable with his Tassa ability and swings at Timon for a total of 14. He passes the turn and I untap for my turn. I draw for my turn. I play a Plains as land for turn. And I tap 7 mana to cast a Butcher of Malakir. I move to combat and my Order of Sacred Dusk attacks Martin for a total of 9 and I gain 9 life. Afterwards I pass the turn and Christopher untaps. He draws for his turn. He plays a Frostboiled Snarl as land for turn, which enters the battlefield tapped because he cannot reveal anything. He immediately taps the Locker to surveil 1. He throws a creature card into his graveyard. Before Christopher can move to combat, Timon taps 3 mana and Wyatt, so Itali fights Admiral Brass, which dies in the fight. Christopher goes back to his first main phase. Christopher taps 7 mana again to recast his commander. That makes him mill 4 cards. So Christopher goes to combat and gets a trigger of Admiral Brass. Christopher brings back an Amphib Mutineer. And so he targets Italy as payback. Italy is destroyed and Timon gets a Salamander. This is the point where Timon reminds us that all of our creatures enter the battlefield tapped. Christopher passes the turn, so Timon untaps. Timon draws for turn. Timon immediately goes to combat and attacks Martin with everything. On attack he gets an Imitator trigger and copies his commander. Before blocks are declared, he taps his icon to make his creature cards flash in. He taps a bunch of mana and we all know what's about to come. He casts an Apex Altisor for 9 mana. So he discovers for 10 twice and he hits an Otepec Huntmaster. And with his next discover he hits a Drover of the Mighty. So pretty disappointing, but a really cool play. He uses the Apex Altisor fight trigger to fight Hakbal, Admiral Brass and finally the Realm Walker, so Apex Altisor also dies. And he can also ping 1 damage with his Regisaur, which goes immediately at Martin's face. We do a little bit of damage calculation and overall Martin goes down to 2 life. Timon gains 5 life because of my Troublemakers. He becomes the Monarch and passes the turn. Martin untaps. Draws for his turn. And he also scries, always due Tassa. Martin taps 7 mana to recast his commander Hakbal. He plays a forest as land for turn. And then he moves to combat, so he gets a bunch of explore triggers. Overall, we will summarize all of it. So he puts a bunch of lands on the field, puts a bunch of +1/+1 counters on his creatures due to the explore, puts more lands into play. And for 2 mana he makes Nikansil unblockable again. He also makes Svasa, God of the Sea, unblockable. And he goes for an all-out swing at Timon. Here we made a little misplay because Hakbal should still be summoning sick. Timon declares a bunch of jump blocks, loses a few creatures in the process, and takes an overall 20 damage, going down to 1. Martin becomes the Monarch and draws a card in his end step. I untap. Draw for my turn. I pay 1 mana to cast a Viscera Seer. I pay an additional 4 mana to cast a Falkenrath Noble. And with my last remaining 2 mana I cast a Charismatic Conqueror. I will catch in a minute that all of these creatures enter the battlefield tapped. I move to combat. And my Order of Sacred Dust attacks Christopher for a total of 12 due to all of the Exalted triggers, and Christopher takes 12. Afterwards I pass the turn and Christopher untaps. Christopher draws for his turn. He moves to combat and the fleet captain attacks Martin. Martin takes the damage and gets kicked out of the game. In his second main phase, Christopher taps 2 mana to cast a Warkite Marauder. He taps an additional 2 mana for a Daring Saboteur and passes the turn. In his end step, I sacrifice my Conqueror into my Phyrexia to drain Timon for 1 life. I also get a Butcher of Malakith trigger, so both of them have to sacrifice a creature, and this is how Timon dies. I immediately jump to my turn, untap all of my creatures, draw for turn. I tap 3 mana to cast Radiant Destiny, naming Vampires, so all of my creatures get +1/+1 and have Vigilance. I go to combat and declare an attack with my Order, my Butcher of Malakith and my 4/3 Flying Vampire. So Christopher tries to convoke for a lethal scheme. It tries to target my Order. In response, I sacrifice it into my Phyrexia. So I drain him for 1 with my Falkenrath Noble. I also get a trigger to create a 4/3 Flying Vampire Demon, and I draw a card. Here we forgot the Anthem effect of Radiant Destiny for the damage calculation, so it took 9 damage. Afterwards we go to second main and I play a Temple of the False God as land for turn. And then I sacrifice my remaining creatures into my Phyrexia to drain him out for the remaining amount of life he has. And we agree that I win the game. Okay everybody, this was a super exciting game and we all really enjoyed all of those precons. We have talked about it, and the play of the game was definitely how Timon attacked with his whole army of dinosaurs to make his Sunfill Image Raider a copy of his commander Pantlaza Sunfavored, and then used his progenitor's icon to flash an Alpex Altisaur to discover for 10 twice. Sadly he didn't get the best hits out of it, but we all thought that this play was really dope. Feel free to let us know down in the comments below how you enjoyed this episode. We sadly saw afterwards that all of those explore triggers weren't in the frame, which made it very hard for me in the post-editing, so I simply just summarized what happened, and we will try to work on that in the next episode. As mentioned, feel free to let me know down in the comments below how you enjoyed this episode, and then I would say see you in the next gameplay. Goodbye guys.